topic today is knowing when to dance and when to tell them to go kiss the hind end of your mule, basically. There's three parts to what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about team building, because team building is so important in anything that we do in life. And certainly Knights of Columbus, that's a team, you know? What are you doing to build that team? And then I want to talk about virtue, because I want to show you how virtues today, and it's an old concept, but it's in depth in the Catholic faith, that virtues really support the good behavior of teams, of individuals, and make teams better. And then I also want to introduce how Catholic social teaching, the four key components or key principles of Catholic social teaching also kind of combine in there too. So I've got three parts to what I'm trying to do. So at the first of the year, we started the new School of Business and Economics here at Catholic University. And as part of this formation, we put together a team of administrators. And then we got together with a fellow by the name of Patrick Lencioni. He's a world-class guru, so to speak. I mean, you know, a management consultant guru, I call him. And this individual worked with us for 2 days on how do we get a really well-functioning, effective team. And it was interesting to go through that experience and listen to some of the things that Patrick told us. For instance, he said that he's worked with the Microsofts of this world, he's worked with Apple, he's worked with the leading corporations in America and around the world, and he's saying that this is the one thing that most corporations have great difficulty with: building a good executive team, getting the executive committee to work as a team, getting the whole company to work as a team. He said that, and he quoted one of the executives that he worked with in saying that, you know, if we could get everybody in the organization rowing in the same direction, we could dominate any market, we could do anything, and we could be successful in anything that we would that we would decide to do. And the interesting thing about it is that it is so rare for organizations to really function very effectively as teams. And I started to think back of all of the teams that I have been involved with over the years. And earlier in my career, I was in corporate America. I worked for corporations. I worked at executive teams. I've been in the academic world now for 20 years, working for different deans, working at administrative kinds of capacities. Of course, I've been involved in so many organizations, civic organizations, charitable organizations. Anytime you have an organization, you get people, you got them working together, in effect, it's a team. All right. What Patrick Lencioni then talked about is this idea that there are 5 things that are really critical in terms of getting a team functioning. I want to mention these, and then we're going to talk about them individually. First of all, you've got to have trust. You've got to have trust between the team members. And then you've got to have some sort of a discernment process where the team decides what needs to get accomplished. And then you've got to have commitment to that goal, that objective that you're going to accomplish. Then you've got to have accountability so that everybody is accountable. Everybody's got a part to play, and if they don't play their part, they are held accountable for not doing that. And then finally, Lencioni talks about the fact that there needs to be a focus on results. You've got to be reminded of what the results, of what we're trying to achieve, and we have to keep everything going in kind of that direction. So, at any rate, 2 weeks ago, let me talk about trust. 2 weeks ago, we had a scholar that came and made a presentation on campus, a scholar from Ohio State, and he did a study of NBA teams. And the interesting thing is he was able to gather data from the last 10 years of all the trades that have been made in the NBA. So he had information about the performance of individual players before they were traded, and then information about how they played after they were traded. He had information about how the team performed, won-loss record and all those kinds of things, points scored and all that stuff. before the trade happened and how and had afterwards. What was interesting about it is it took 15 games after the trade for that player who was traded to improve his performance to the level that player had achieved prior to the trade. So here you got a player, you know, he's good. He gets on a new team, his performance goes down, and it stays down for 15 cycles, 15 games. What's happening there? Why is it that the performance is lower for 15 games? Anybody tell me?
Gotta get used to the new people. And
Gotta get used to your teammates. All right. Yeah, you gotta know, well, in basketball terms, you know, you gotta know where this player likes to shoot, or what's really good about this player in terms of guarding people, or, you know, what he's gonna do with the ball here. You gotta learn the plays, you gotta learn all of that kind of thing. The same thing happens in any organization. You gotta know your teammates. All right. That requires a level of trust. I remember as a collegian, I volunteered to coach the baseball team. So I had, you know, little league team. I had 10, 11, 12-year-old kids. And I remember I made a rule. I said, and I was basing this because I wasn't a very good athlete. I said, if you come to practice, if you make it to practice and you practice, you're going to play in the game. Okay, that's the rule. You come and play and practice, you're going to make it in the game. So I remember the very first game, I made the starting lineup. I started reading the starting lineup, and I read one kid's name. And one of the better kids on the team says, Coach, don't play him. He's no good. We'll lose. What am I supposed to do with that? You know, and I, you know, I mean, all right, I understand here. We do want to win, but we want to win for the season. And we need to get everybody to play better. So we got, in order to play better, we've got to get everybody to at least have a chance to play. And if the players that aren't as good never play, they're not going to improve. All right, so it's this idea. But I recognize that people understand when they don't trust other players. They don't trust teammates. And trust is so important. That's has to happen. President Ronald Reagan used to say, trust but verify. In other words, we trust you, Russians. Yeah, we'll trust you, but we're going to verify everything. I remember one boss I had did not behave that way. She just had this attitude that she didn't trust anybody. And you know what? When your boss doesn't trust you, you have a great deal of difficulty trusting your boss. It just doesn't work. Trust is really important. So you can see that trust is that first basis. If you're going to have a good organization, if you're going to have a good team, you've got to have trust in between all of the organization members, all of the players. All right, I got a little bit of handout here, so this kind of will draw some of the things that we're talking about. Let's start this here. I wonder if that's how you started in that direction. Pass it over here. All righty, so we're looking at that base level there on the little my diagram on the front, the triangular thing, the pyramidal shape. Thank you very much. Trust among members. The next level up is discernment. This process of getting everybody on the same page. And I'll go back to that Little League example again. I had one player, young African-American boy named Jerry Gilbert, okay? And Jerry Gilbert was a pretty good pitcher, and he was one of our pitchers. And he was the grandson of the president of the NAACP local official. This was an older gentleman, a big gentleman with a very loud voice. But at any rate, so Jerry's out there, he's pitching, and of course I've told Jerry, no, we're not throwing curveballs. What we're doing is we're trying to paint the corners. We're moving the ball around, high, low, inside, outside. That's what we're practicing on. But you're too young to throw a curve. All right, you're 11 years old. So he gets out there, and the first thing I hear is this big voice from the stands, Jerry Gilbert's grandfather. Throw the curve, Jerry! You know, jeez, you know. And there's Jerry trying to throw the curve, and it's bouncing in the dirt, and the runners are stealing second base. And all right, what do I do here? Timeout. Talk to my player. No curving. We're throwing the ball straight in there. You know, we're moving inside, outside, up and down. You know, position thing. You know, okay, go back again and again. The grandfather's yelling, throw the curve, and Jerry's trying to please his grandfather. This guy was intimidating. I mean, here I am, just a young collegian. You know, I don't want to go out and tell this president of the NAACP to shut up, or you know, what do I do? You got to get everybody on the same page, or else you're not going to get it going. And of course, in that particular situation, I guess I finally, between innings, went out of the dugout and I went over there and said, Mr. Gilbert, I need your help. You know, we're not throwing curveballs. We're too young. We're 11-year-old, too young. Don't yell at your grandson. That was the toughest thing that I've done. You know, I mean, I can do a lot of things, but that was really a difficult thing. And I guess, but you see, you got to get that accomplished. Okay. Yeah, all righty. I remember, okay, the next thing up here is getting commitment. And I can remember one situation where I was vice president of marketing for an organization, and we had developed a new laboratory, and it was a self-sealing laboratory. And if anybody understands, a laboratory is you know, we sometimes we call them sinks, but they drop in a countertop. And then, of course, the plumber has to seal around the edge to keep water from sliding off the top and going down, you know, so they seal around the edge. And plumbers aren't particularly good at sealing. They're good at connecting pipes and all that kind of stuff, but it takes kind of a craftsman to apply that thing. We had a laboratory that had a vinyl seal to it that would self-seal. And so it really, every time it was installed, even though the plumber had two left hands, they could install it and it looked sharp. So this was kind of a breakthrough for us, and I managed to get a customer, one of our very first customers for this product was in Canada, a large Canadian distributor. They ordered 7 truckloads of this stuff. So we needed a commitment, obviously, on our manufacturing team that they were going to, of course, deliver the product on time, and that they were going to get the right quality. Well, what happened in this situation is that the manufacturing manager cut corners on this thing and tried to speed up the manufacturing process so that he could claim that he was able to bring this thing in under the standard costs for it. By speeding up the manufacturing process, he induced a warp in this thing. And what this did is it rendered it so that it did not seal. So we ended up with 7 truckloads of product up there in Canada that didn't work. And I'm telling you, all of the problems that were involved with that, it was incredible. I mean, that was one of the most difficult deals to face this customer. And I'm the vice president of marketing. It falls on me to explain that, I'm sorry, we made a mistake and we're going to make it good to you. You know, it caused all sorts of embarrassment for that company and their customers. Accountability. One of the things that we did as Knights of Columbus, we started a food bank. And this is back in Mississippi where I worked for 13 years. And pretty soon we had 250 families in the county that were coming to us every week expecting to get bags of groceries. This turned out to be a rather big thing because nobody's paid. This is all a volunteer activity. And getting the volunteers to do all of the things that are involved in this, gathering food, knowing how much food was available, getting them placed into bags that all had the same, in effect, sort of materials in it. And then getting these so that when the customers come, we have to check those people in, make sure that in fact they did meet the low income requirement in order to get free food. And this whole process, it was amazing because of course it was prayer, but it was the kind of thing that everybody said, all right, I got a job, I'm gonna get that job done. And if I was having difficulty getting the job done, then I was finding somebody else to come and jump in and give me some assistance to get that job accomplished, so that every Saturday we were able to go through and deliver that kind of quantity and serve that quantity of customers. All right, and then of course results are very important as well. So I've got an interesting little questionnaire that Pat Lencioni came up with. And now, is everybody here a Knights of Columbus member? I know you would be not Knights of Columbus, but you probably are in an organization of some sort. Yes? Do you have an organization that you belong to?
No.
No. Okay, that's interesting. Who does not have an organization they belong to, or a team that they serve with? Because what I thought would be interesting to do is to kind of look at this questionnaire. This is a questionnaire that Patrick Lencioni put together to try to understand the strengths and weaknesses of teams with respect to these 5 characteristics that we've been talking about. So I'm going to start these around. So everybody take one. And that might give us some input then on might give us some ideas a little bit on the kind of what's involved, I guess, in achieving the high level in each of these characteristics. So I'd like to take just a couple moments, if you could, maybe to look at some of these questions. I'm not collecting this, of course. This is just a matter of something for our own benefit to understand things. Yeah, if you just kind of roll through this, don't spend a lot of time and try not to overthink your answers. And then after you go through the questionnaire on the front side, there's a scoring mechanism that's printed on the back. So Amanda, even though you're not in an organization now, I'm sure that you will be at some point in time. I mean, that's just life goes on, you know, and you get involved in all sorts of things. And I've attended plenty of Knights of Columbus meetings to know that, number one, team members are passionate and unguarded in their discussion of issues. I don't know whether that's the way it happens here with the council. But my experience is there's lots of passion that is expressed in meetings in terms of what needs to be done or what hasn't been done or how we should do things better. But number two, team members call out one another's deficiencies or unproductive behaviors. My view is that doesn't occur very often. In the organizations that I've been involved with, that's one of the deficiencies. That people will, they don't want to get people upset, so they don't say anything. You know, they in effect sit on their criticism. Or they might generalize it, gee, we might want to do a little better job here, but they never go out and single out anybody and say, you know, you were supposed to do this, but you didn't. But this is a challenge of good teamwork. We have to be able to hold people accountable for the things that they've committed to. A lot of times, you know, number three, team members know what their peers are working on and how they contribute to the collective good of the team. And in my experience, oftentimes people pay attention to what they are responsible for, but they really fail to even understand what everybody else is supposed to be doing or the complexities that the other folks are facing. And you know, eventually, you as a team member have to help your other team members out when they need help. So you do need to know what it is that they're doing and when it is that they need some assistance. Team members openly admit their mistakes and weaknesses. That's question 6. I rarely see that. I rarely see that individuals ever acknowledge their own weaknesses. And yet, if we have effective trust between team members, then we should feel confident that when we acknowledge our weaknesses to others, it's not going to come back. I mean, you know, they're not going to think poorly of us. They're going to come to our aid and help us do a better job. Okay, so some of those are good things. I want to kind of move on here, and I want to say that as I kind of look back at my career, I've been a pretty good team member, I think. And I was then trying to say, well, why is that? Why have I been a pretty good team member? And I think it all had to do with good parents. I think my parents instilled this in me. I don't think it had much to do with me. I think it had to do with what I was given. Because I do know this, I graduated in engineering from Purdue. I mean, I grew up Catholic, but going away to Purdue and then getting involved in fraternities. In a fraternity, I managed to learn how to drink, learn how to smoke, learn how to swear, and learn how to tell lies. So all of these skills that I have now spent the rest of my life trying to rid myself of. So you can see I'm not exactly too big of a fan of fraternities. I think that's, unfortunately, it's not been a good influence in my situation, and I think in a lot of cases. But graduating, taking a job, I was a good team member. And I very rapidly seemed to get attention from the high executives in my organization, that I was somebody that had executive potential. And I moved up. I mean, I had 10 promotions in the first 15 years that I was with this company. So that's fairly quick moving up. And I look back and I do realize that I was always somebody that was there, effectively getting my job done, but I was also always volunteering to assist other people in need that were involved in the team, whatever team was involved. I was in an engineering team, I was involved in a financial team, because I had moved through all segments of the organization. So I don't know, it's I was lucky, I guess is the right way to say it. And I want to talk a little bit about my personal situation later. But as I look back at it, I realized that some of the other people that I knew that were really good team members had good Catholic sensibilities. And then I started to think, well, what is it about being Catholic that makes you a good team member? And I started hitting on this idea of the virtues. Theological virtues, we know as Catholics that the theological virtues drive the cardinal virtues. And on that chart that I passed out earlier, we've got the 4 cardinal virtues there on the left. The virtues, this is something that's kind of old school thing. I mean, they've been around since the Greeks. They started coming up with this idea of the cardinal virtues, but it's Thomas Aquinas grabbed a hold of this, and it's become an integral part of Catholicism over the years. That these virtues are very important. And what are virtues? Virtues are habits that we develop so that we don't have to think about things. I mean, it's a way that we go about living our lives. And so I realized that because I had a good upbringing, I seemed to be automatically going toward being effective at showing prudence in terms of judgment, in showing fairness, in showing and understanding justice, in understanding temperance, and exhibiting courage, the 4 cardinal virtues. So at any rate, it wasn't particularly good, but let me go into a little bit about my faith story. At age 39, I was vice president of this company, a fairly large Fortune 500 company. I was driving European sports cars. I had a really nice large estate, I guess, that overlooked a golf course and some lakes. I mean, this was the kind of the American dream type of deal. And I was spending a lot of time at work, obviously, a lot of travel, and so I had accumulated a whole bunch of miles, and so I decided, hey, family, let's go over to Europe. We had enough miles to pay for all the trip over there, why not? I had a 12-year-old daughter. I told her, I said, what would you like to do in Europe? Would you like to see Eiffel Tower? Would you like to go to Big Ben and, go to Chartres and see the cathedrals? What would you like to do? She had heard something about this Medjugorje and about this idea that this Blessed Mother was appearing to children in this part of Yugoslavia. And I don't know if anybody heard of Medjugorje? Recently there was an announcement, I think, like news the last couple of weeks, that basically said, caution people, because apparently visions are supposedly still going on there, and there's some question about whether this is authentic or not. So, at any rate, I said to my daughter, well, if you want to go, I don't know, but there's lots of better things we can do. Why would we want to go there? Well, one thing led to another, and we ended up there, and because God wanted me there, I guess. And in Medjugorje, the very first place where supposedly this apparition of the Blessed Mother talking to these children appeared was up kind of on the hillside. And so we walked up to this place on the hillside, and we saw this kind of rocky ground, kind of a clearing in the trees, And there was a fairly large cross that somebody had erected. And then there were hundreds and hundreds of other little crosses or big crosses, small crosses, crosses of all shapes and sizes that people had stuck in the ground around this cross in this area where the Blessed Virgin had appeared. And so I'm there. There's nobody else around. There's just me. My kids have run off someplace else. And I'm just kind of soaking this whole thing in, and it's very quiet. And I'm looking at these crosses, and then my eye catches this one cross that somebody had built there. It was two twigs that were put together, and they, tied together. They were crooked. It was stuck in the rocks. The whole thing was crooked. And then dangling from it were two white plastic rosaries. Look at it, well, that's probably the glow-in-the-dark kind. How cheap and how crummy is that? Now, my engineering attitude kind of comes through with this whole thing and says, this is ridiculous. Whoever did this, I mean, come on. If you're going to do something like this, you should at least get it straight. You should take the leaves off of the branches that you're putting in the ground. You should, I'm going through all of this thing, and then suddenly I hear this voice in my head. It's a female's voice. Ryan, that's the cross that you built for the King of the Universe. And it just hit me, uh-oh. And I realized, man, I've been doing all of this stuff for my companies. I've been shirking my family. I haven't been paying any attention to what God's wanted me to do. I mean, I got all this worldly success, and that's the cross that I'm preparing for. Anyway, that I think, I keep going back to that moment in my life because God was grabbing a hold of me and getting attention to this thing. After we came back from that, it was shortly thereafter that my boss called me in. And my boss, he had a big ego, a real huge ego. I mean, a lot of times presidents of companies, and he was the president of the company, a lot of times folks like this do have an ego. And I just said, all right, fine. He told me, he says, Bob, and it wasn't his name, but I call him Bob. He said, I don't like Bob. He's too fat. Why don't you get rid of him? So Bob was the guy that did marketing research for me. So he was a direct report. And he had people on it. And it's true, Bob was large. He looked like he could play as an offensive lineman for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, he was big, And so I said, well, he's an exemplary employee. I mean, he's doing a fantastic job in this area. I don't want to get rid of him. My boss said, no, I don't like the way he makes the office look. It's not part of our image. Get rid of him. And I said, we can't get rid of him. He's a good guy. I mean, I said, why don't we move him? We put in the market research function. We'll move it out to the plant if you're concerned about headquarters and all. No, get rid of him. I said, how can I get rid of him? He says, make up something. Accuse him of something. I'll back you up. Get rid of him. Okay. So I thought about this overnight, and I came to the conclusion that I can't do something like this. This violates everything. That's unfair. I mean, you got a good employee, come on. So I went in and told him I can't do this. I'm not going to do it. He's a good employee. This is not. And he said, well, if you're not going to do it, then you're not going to keep your job. You're wrong. And so I had maybe 20 seconds to figure out how to pull myself out of that. And I said, okay, I'm going. I concluded that. And that was it. I lost my job. Going back to the title of my presentation, you got to know when to dance, but you got to also know when to tell them to kiss your donkey. But God was preparing me for that, and I'm glad that I did it, because had I acquiesced, I'm sure that the next week there would have been something else that he would have asked me to do that would have been unethical and illegal. Once you commit to something like that, they got you. And you know, it's going to continue on. So fortunately, I went from there to become vice president of another organization, then president of a company, and then retired from business, went to school, got a PhD, and became a faculty member in college and started talking about business experiences. Okay. So, I would say that in order to be a really good team member, you need to be able to practice those cardinal virtues. And I think that's what makes you a good dancer. Eventually, every single one of you will be put in that kind of a position where you will be asked to do something that goes against what you believe. And you've got to come to grips with, what are you going to do? If you practice the virtues, you're going to know what to do in that situation. Yeah, okay. I've done some research, colleagues of mine put together some research looking at salespeople dyads. In other words, we're talking about situations where the salesperson and the sales manager kind of put together. And what we've been doing is we've been looking at their virtuosity. We have a virtuosity scale, so we tell how virtuous they claim to be, at least, you know, on a pen and pencil test. And then what we did is we compared the difference between the employee and the boss. And what we found is when there were very little difference in terms of virtuosity, the employee said that they were happier at work and that they were more enthusiastic about the company and that they had a less likelihood of quitting the firm. But when we found situations where there was a difference, a bigger difference between the virtuosity of the boss and of the salesperson, all of these indicators went the other way. The employee was less happy with the company, less happy with the boss, and had a greater incidence of potential for quitting. And of course, in corporations, you don't want to lose salespeople. Salespeople are costly. You get a good salesperson, it requires a lot of training to bring them up to the speed, you know. You don't want them to leave, so every time you move them into another position in the organization, they are now working for somebody else. There needs to be virtue going on there. If you don't have that, then all of a sudden you start losing salespeople. There's an indication there. Okay. All right. Prudence affects discernment, commitment, and accountability. So I'm looking over at that left side of that little handout. On the left side of the handout, looking at the top three virtues: prudence, courage, temperance. They affect discernment, commitment, and accountability. I don't know whether you remember, there was a company called Engelland. Engelland was a company on the West Coast, an energy firm, that at the time was one of the largest bankruptcies that had ever occurred. We've had larger ones since then, fortunately. The president of that company was a fellow by the name of Kenneth Lay, and supposedly a good Christian, ethical individual. Kenneth Lay was put on trial for misleading investors and misrepresenting the books of the corporation of Enron, attracting more people to invest in a company that was actually not at all in good financial shape as it was claiming to be. And then, of course, he was found guilty. And then between the time he was found guilty and the time that they sentencing was 2 weeks, scheduled 2 weeks later, a friend of mine by the name of O.C. Farrell at New Mexico State University had a chance to interview him, and he had 40 hours worth of interviews of Kenneth Lay. and he chronicled Kenneth Lay's life and what made him think and everything else. Kenneth Lay, even after being found guilty, still believed that even though they had misled consumers, he believed that they had followed accounting rules, and therefore they had done nothing wrong. This man couldn't figure out the difference between strict adherence to rules that he thought he had obeyed, even though he recognized that by adhering to those rules, it misled investors. And of course, the sad thing about Kenneth Lay is that he, before he was sentenced, he suffered a massive heart attack and died. It's even before he got sentenced. And that, obviously, the heart attack was due to the fact that he was so torn up because of the fact this dichotomy of believing one thing and acting another way in his thing. Yeah, justice, courage, and temperance, more virtues, they go hand in hand. Another example, a good example, I think, I was in Mississippi. There was a company down there in Jackson, Mississippi called MCI WorldCom. Perhaps you heard of WorldCom. At one point in time when they acquired Sprint, they became even larger than AT&T in terms of the total telecommunications program. There was the CEO down there was Bernie Evers. Bernie was a charismatic character. He liked coaching. He was one that was always committed to getting, he would try to get his folks to conquer all, basically, achieve everything, go, constantly moving forward at a rapid rate, and never losing, basically, always winning. Bernie made statements to the investment community about what their earnings were going to be, and he had to make sure that the company's earnings did in fact occur as he had promised. And in some situations, suddenly it started getting a stretch. So he basically instructed his high-end vice president of finance to cook the books, basically, borrow some money from one account to basically make it look like they had made more money. There was the vice president of auditing was someone that I knew as a student at my previous institution, and she had taken a job there. Her name was Cynthia Cooper. Cynthia, to her credit, found out that something fishy was going on. And so she did some undercover sleuth work and managed to figure out who it was that was pulling this stuff out and realizing what was happening, that they were misrepresenting their profitability. And so she was the one that then blew the whistle. In other words, she brought the federal government in to say, hey, you're cheating here. It took a great deal of courage for her to do that, and because subsequently, they accused her of all sorts of things. They accused her of stealing money from the company. They accused her of marital infidelity. They accused her of all sorts of things to try to undermine her credibility as a whistleblower. But she stuck it out, and it took a great deal of courage for her to do that. And as a result of all of that, Bernie Evers was found guilty, and he's still serving time, 25 years, for his role in cooking the books there at MCI WorldCom. Okay, wow. Virtue. If you practice virtue, it makes you a better team member. But the other side of the thing, and this again is supported by that real strong base that goes across the bottom, theological virtues, this understanding of how God informs us of what to do. We've got the social encyclicals, the idea of the 4 principles of Catholic social teaching that are very important for us to understand as well. And I think a lot of times we as Catholics kind of forget those things. Why? I'm not sure. I think it's because the encyclicals are difficult to read. They were written in Italian or written in Polish or written in German and then translated into what do you call it? Roman. What's Roman? That's Latin. Excuse me. Yeah, what's the matter with me? Translated into Latin and then translated in English. So they had a couple translations going on, and sometimes they don't read like things we would like to read. But they're so rich in understanding and so important for us to understand things. So we have human dignity, solidarity, subsidiarity, and then common good are those four principles that are very important. They really do help guide us in terms of overall direction and overall objectives that any organization needs to take. So I'm thinking there of solidarity and subsidiarity. The two have a certain tension between the two. Solidarity says that we have a personal obligation to help others who have a need. We have a personal obligation. In other words, it's up to us to do something when we have the means and ability to help it. And it's not good for us to say, oh, that's the government's responsibility, they'll do it. I pay taxes. No, the church says it's your responsibility to help others. And then the other side of that is subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is this idea of the kind of help that you provide. It's not enough to just give somebody a sandwich when they're hungry. What you should be doing is teaching them skills so that they can learn those skills and earn income so that they can become full citizens and bring their own food to the thing. It's a difference. And I think that's why Obamacare is such goes in the wrong direction on something that is so important to individuals. You are responsible for the health care you provide to your family. And now what we've done is we've instituted a government program that basically specifies what it is that the individual has to buy, what has to provide, and in a way that has to be done in the type of providers. It's taken away the personal authority of the individual. It's a violation of subsidiarity. So in our efforts to accomplish solidarity with the poor, we have violated subsidiarity in a way in which that law came about and the way it is structured. Solidarity is important. I want to give you an example of another company that tried to reach out effectively, and that is a company that is out in Silicon Valley. It's called Real Manufacturing. It's not a company that most people have heard of because it's a company that manufactures plastic parts for computers. It competes with a whole bunch of Chinese and Korean and Southeast Asian companies, but it's located in Silicon Valley, so it's got a manufacturing operation out there. Solidarity and human dignity basically demand that we pay people fair wages. And the church defines a fair wage as a wage that allows the individual to cover his obligations, but also to save for the future, save money for the future. It's a hard way to define what that means in terms of dollars and cents, but Real Manufacturing company said, we like to run our business in such a way that we do respect human dignity. And so what they did is they basically did in-depth interviews with all of their employees in terms of how those folks were doing, what struggles they were having, were they actually able to save money on the pay that they were getting. As a result of those interviews, they realized that the folks that were the injection molders, basically running these machines, weren't getting paid enough. to cover the obligations of living in a high-cost area like Silicon Valley, and then also being able to save money for their families and friends, for the future. So real manufacturers said, we need to pay them more, but if we pay them more, we're gonna go out of business because that's gonna raise our labor costs, and we're competing with these Chinese firms, and the companies will take the business overseas. What they did, because they were convinced that they needed to do this, what they did is they upgraded the jobs of these machine operators. What they did is they said, okay, we're gonna make you also responsibility for quality control. So what that did is eliminated some quality control positions that they were able to take care of through attrition. And then they said, okay, we're gonna make you also responsible for scheduling, how you schedule and how you order the raw materials. So scheduling and ordering the raw materials, they were able to reduce people in those departments because now the folks on the floor were doing these things. And by upgrading their jobs, they were able to increase their pay to a living wage. And then they were able to basically meet this whole idea of being, providing, recognizing human dignity in their employees. Good example. Let's see. Common good. That's an overriding concern as well. And I'm pleased to say that in one company that I was involved with, the common good consideration, it was one of these things where the EPA told us that our plant was polluting the air too much. And of course, we went through the requirements of getting air scrubbers on the effluent to bring it into compliance. And we realized it was a huge capital expenditure. This happened to be a brass foundry in Marysville, Ohio. And so then the question amongst our decision team, what do we do? Do we spend this money? It's really not a good capital investment. How do we protect the jobs of these people? We just shut this plant down, what do we do? Well, we started a plan because Marysville is also where Honda Motor Company has a huge factory. And talking to the Honda executives, they were trying to expand their plant. So we made arrangements for the way we reduced our operation so that we could get our good employees to transfer over and get good jobs in the Honda operation. So that way we were able to scale down the operation in such a way that we were able to eliminate the pollution problems. And then of course we bought our brass from other suppliers that had already made these investments. So that was one of those win-win situations in terms of making sure that the common good was protected. Okay, I'm finishing up here. One other thing that I'd like to say is all my years in Knights of Columbus, I realized that there's always been folks in the council that have stepped forward in an unselfish kind of a way, acting on the virtues, acting on the social teachings, and helping others in need. And I can think of one individual, bless his heart, Gary McFadgen, and he was with me there in Mississippi. Here's a man that lost his hearing at age 6, so he's deaf. But this guy has got a heart as big as gold, because any time there's something that needs to be done, he's the very first to volunteer. Somebody's moving, he's there to help you move. Somebody's building an addition to their house, he's there to help out. There's something that, something needs to be done at church, he's there. And of course, it's not him. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other people that have done that, and that's one of the things that I really like about the Knights. It gets this whole idea of, obviously, charity, fraternity, unity, patriotism, all of those things come together very effectively, and it helps amplify us as Catholics. Amplify our understanding of the faith and making it actionable.